My favorite acoustic blues player, hands down, gotta be Mississippi John Hurt. And when I first started learning his tunes, I was able to get the notes down, but it didn't sound quite right. It didn't sound just like him, which is what I was going for. His style can sound simple at first, but there are a few techniques that you really need to have going and working together in order to get a sound that's a little bit closer to what he gets. And in this lesson, I'm gonna break down 3 of what I think are very important techniques to help make his style happen on your guitar. You can play his tunes without this, like I did for years, but we're going to take that extra step right here to dial in a sound that's closer to Mississippi John Hurt's playing. We're going to use a coffee blues style example as we put these 3 elements into action. So if you're ready, let's dive in with the first element. The thumb's job in acoustic blues is critical in 2 ways. First, it's responsible for playing those nice low notes, the bass line, but we often overlook the second important job of the thumb, and that is it sets the beat, it drives the rhythm. And we're going to circle back to that rhythm part in just a second, but first we got to make sure that we've got down the basic technique. If you're brand new to fingerstyle blues, start your thumb picking journey with what's called dead bass. That's what I'm doing here, just playing the bass, an open 5th string in this case, on the beat, right? But once we get ready to play some John Hurt style stuff, we want to start alternating the bass line. So every other beat, we're going to change strings. And in this case, we're going to do it with an A major on the fretboard, and I'm going to change between the 5th string and 4th string. So we'll call this a 5/4 alternating bass line. Now, a couple things to keep in mind that I'm doing here. One, notice my thumb is plucking the strings and then moving away from them each time, as opposed to just pushing down through them, right? This is called a rest stroke. We're resting on the next string. We don't want that for this because we need to get the thumb out of the way because some other fingers are going to have to take over and play some other notes as we move along through our lesson here. What we want is that free stroke where the thumb moves away. The other thing that we want is a palm mute happening on strings 5 and 4. So I've got the edge of my hand here sitting right in front of the saddle, lightly, just so the notes don't ring out like this. We get a little bit of a thump sound going. And once you can do this and get that movement down, then switch over to a 6/4, 6/4 alternation. So that's the 6th string and the 4th string, and an E major chord is the perfect one to work on this with. And then of course, you want to play this along with a steady beat to make sure that you're able to do this in time. Practice the 5/4 alternating bass line first and do it along with a metronome so that we're building or reinforcing good timing, because it's not just about playing those low notes. We want to make sure that we've got solid timing because we are setting the rhythm, we're setting the pace for everything that we're going to hang on top of this bass line. But once you're comfortable with that 5/4 pattern, then move on to the 6/4 pattern over an E chord. And you might notice that skipping over that 5th string can be a little bit trickier than you might think. So take your time with it before moving on to the next stage where you're switching between the 2 patterns. And once you get that down, you're going to need one other thing to get a little bit closer to Mississippi John Hurt's sound. See if you can hear what I'm adding in this example. When I started studying Hurt's playing, I noticed a little extra push that would sometimes happen on beats 2 and 4. And that push can carry through to the 3rd string for even more of an accent on those beats. And it really contributed something to the playing. It's not about just playing louder, although that can be part of it, but it's more about digging in and pushing through those strings to give the part a little extra oomph on beats 2 and 4. Let's take a look. Let's fret an E major in the open position, and we're going to play our alternating bass line, 6/4. And what we're going to do is pinch on top of beat 1 with the open 2nd string, then on the and of beat 2, we're going to play the open 1st string. Let's just take that. We can really do a lot with just this one measure here to accent beats 2 and 4. The first thing we can do, keep in mind we've got a palm mute here, is to push a little harder on those beats. So when we move up to the 4th string, we're playing just a little harder than on beats 1 and 3 on the 6th string. it gives us a little punch, right? Here's if we just play it nice and even and with the punch. Keep in mind we've got that palm mute there to just kind of tame things down. But what we want to do here is start to introduce this little strum that we can do on those beats. It gives the piece a little lift. It's not something you do every single measure, but here I'm using the thumb to just drum down through strings 4 and 3, and sometimes I'll catch the second string as well, and that's okay. If we do that with our measure, you can hear how we get this full sound versus just playing it straight, right? It's a really cool sound to add to your toolkit. All right, cool. We've got a really solid foundation laid right now that's pushing through those strings and creating a big sound on the lower strings. But we got to do some cool stuff on top with the melody. That's what we're going to look at next. A lot of Mississippi John Hurt songs use relatively simple major chord shapes, and that bright melody that he layers on top of the thumb bass comes from notes that are right there near that shape. Mostly. Not always, and if you've tried your hand at Candyman, you know the exception, but for the most part, the notes are really right there under your fingers using common chord shapes. Here's a basic coffee blues style melody over a D major chord. If we strip away the bass and the chord shapes, that's what we'll have for the melody. We'll start with an F, then up to F sharp, and then we need the D on the second string, 3rd fret. Before playing a pair of hammer-ons, where we go from the open first, up to that F sharp, and then play the D. We'll talk about the timing of that in a minute. It's really cool. And then we're going to play the open first string, C sharp, 2nd string, 2nd fret, and then A, 3rd string, 2nd fret, right? And that gets us through the opening melody phrases. But we can play this while holding down the chord shapes. So what we'll do is actually start by just dropping that chord shape down a half step to play that F note on the 1st string, 1st fret. Of course, you could just play it and get out of the chord shape and then kind of step your way into it. That's what I tend to do. Either way is fine, whatever you're comfortable with there. But the key is that we're thinking about D major here and making sense of this little line from D major. And it really makes sense when you think about what we're doing, which is that classic blues move of incorporating the minor 3rd of our chord up to the major 3rd, right? There's a D minor, that F note's in it. Here's the D major with the F sharp. That's that classic blues move. But then we move into the hammer-ons, and the timing is very important here. So let's bring on our bass to establish where the beat is. We'll play a 5-4, 5-4 alternating bass line here. So it's the A and then the D note. And for our hammer-ons, we're going to start on the and of 1. So 1 and 2. Notice that I start in between the bass, but I land on the bass note. 1 and 2. 1 and 2 and. But we finish it with that D, and of 2. And then we start on top of beat 3 and play that same sequence. So we've got a different rhythm relative to the bass here. Really cool. But then we move into an A chord. So we can go ahead and switch chords. Keep our alternating bass going, 5-4. And we're just going to pinch on top of beat 1 with the open 1st string. Play the C sharp. Remember, that's what we did when we just played the melody notes. And then ultimately we're going to the A note. And that happens on the and. Right? And if we keep going, we can play some other melody notes that continue a different phrase. We're going to get to that in just a second, but know the main melody structure here. At first, you might think that's all there is to it. Just pick out the melody notes while keeping that thumb bass going. But the real trick is all in the timing. Let's take a closer look. All right, let's back up to that last measure over A, this one. It's got something really cool happening rhythmically, but with the melody. We're syncopating it. We've got kind of this falling forward sound to it. Right? We're going to get that technique down in just a second, but let's make sure we've gotten the notes. We're going to play the 5-4, 5-4 bass line here, right? With an A, in this case an A7 fretted. We don't need that third string here, but I want my little finger free so that I can play a note on the first string. That's going to happen in just a second, but we're going to start with the bass. And of 1 is the open first string, and then bass by itself, and then the C sharp second string, second fret. So first up, you can see how we're kind of weaving the melody notes in between the bass. But on beat 3, that's where we plant the little finger on the second fret, F sharp, first string, and play with the bass. Then back to that C sharp, and then bass with the open first string. So if we just play the notes without any particular attention paid to the overall timing, this is what we get. All right, run that through a couple times to make sure you've got it before we try to apply this syncopated sound. All right, hear how it's different? One more time. Verses. Now, how do we get to that falling forward sound? Well, let's do this. Let's take the bass and then every note that's in between the bass line. So this first one's a good example. Let's try to play that immediately, as close as possible to the next bass note. Something like this. Let's do that again. Do that a few times, and you're starting to get into that syncopated sound with the melody. Right? Speed it up, and then you'll naturally fall into more of a syncopated sound. With our thumb bass going and bright syncopated melody laying right on top, there's one more element that we need to help us fill out this sound. Let's take a look at that. You might not notice this at first, but once we talk about it, you're probably going to start picking up on it throughout a lot of his tunes. There are these little filler notes that do a great job of just falling right in between the cracks of the bass line and the snappy melody notes that we just learned, and it really gives the part a lot of forward momentum. Let me show you what I mean. All right, this sounds busy, and it kind of is, but we're going to slow things down here. Let's take a look at what we already know. We've got an A major fretted on the fretboard here, and we're using the 5-4 alternating bass. And we start out by pinching the bass in our first melody note. That's the second string, second fret, it's under the chord. Then we've got our first filler note, and this really does fall right in between the bass and fills out the sound a little bit. So that's on the and of 1, then bass, and of 2 is the open first string. Then we go back to the bass for beat 3, second string for the and of 3, bass, and then another filler note there on the third string. All of that is under the chord. So we have 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, right? When we apply a little bit of that syncopated falling forward sound where we're pushing those eighth notes, we can do our same exercise that we talked about in the syncopation section of the lesson. And play it with that sort of weird timing just to kind of break our straight eighth timing, sense of timing, and get into that wonky, uneven timing sound. Then we can play that with a tempo, still have that falling forward sound before speeding it up and sounding like this. These filler notes are usually coming from a chord that you're already holding down, but they can be really quick and sometimes even quiet, but they really do a lot to fill out the sound. And so now we've got these three elements. Let's hear them work together in a coffee blues style performance. Earlier I mentioned that Mississippi John Hurt songs use relatively simple major chords in the open position. And that's true, but the thing is, songs like Candyman show us that there's a whole nother level to his playing that takes us beyond those basic open position chords. So click right here to watch this video next and learn a simple approach that will have you playing chord shapes confidently up the neck. I'll see you there. Until then, practice smart and play on.